The small town of Prescott Falls had always seemed the sort of place where trouble never stayed long. People lived quiet lives, and generations passed down stories of simpler times when children played freely and neighbors looked out for one another. But somewhere in those quiet streets and among those unwritten rules of small-town camaraderie, young Marcus Wesson was learning a far different set of values. To the townsfolk, he was polite and soft-spoken, never a troublemaker, yet behind closed doors, a storm was brewing. Marcus was raised in a strict home, his mother devoutly religious, his father's silence an imposing presence. Marcus watched as his mother's fervor for religious teachings grew from harmless Bible studies to something more consuming. She began speaking about divine punishments, casting shame upon Marcus and his siblings for even the smallest transgressions. The family lived in near isolation, interacting with the outside world only when necessary. For Marcus, reality was confined to the four walls of their modest house and the sparse woods beyond, where he found solace when his mother's voice grew too loud and her gaze too judgmental. Yet the stillness of the woods only mirrored the growing unrest within Marcus. The quiet reinforced the fear and confusion he felt at home, a pressure that built within him year after year. Over time, his view of family, authority, and love twisted under the weight of his mother's teachings, her voice becoming an ever-present echo in his mind. Love, he believed, was something harsh and unyielding. Obedience was not a choice, but a form of survival. By the time Marcus turned 18, his experiences had hardened him. The notion of control had rooted itself in his mind as a necessary means of keeping a family together. He believed that order was only achieved through submission, a conviction he would carry with him long after he left Prescott Falls. But the small town had left its mark, and Marcus took its lessons with him into the world. He wandered through various jobs and cities, always searching for something elusive, some meaning that he felt had been missing all along. In his heart, there lingered a bitterness, a desire to be more than what life had handed him. His eyes grew colder, his demeanor more distant, his convictions stronger, and as he sought love he began to mold it into the rigid and oppressive form he had learned as a child. Yet beneath that quiet exterior was a simmering darkness, a depth even he may not have fully comprehended. And though he didn't know it yet, Marcus Wesson's story was far from over. It was only just beginning. The years drifted by, yet Marcus's restlessness only grew stronger. He'd spent his 20s floating through dead-end jobs and unremarkable cities, always harboring a sense of dissatisfaction. He began to understand what he wanted, not the chaotic freedom he'd once imagined, but something structured, something loyal and constant. He wanted a family, not just any family, but one that would belong solely to him, one bound by a love he could control, a love that obeyed. It was in the spring of 1980 that Marcus met Patricia. She was young, barely out of high school, and drawn to his quiet, thoughtful nature. He held her hand gently, spoke to her in a low, measured tone that belied his intense inner world. To Patricia he was mysterious, intriguing, and strangely comforting. In Marcus, she saw the stability her own life had lacked, and in her, he saw someone who could be molded, someone who might fit perfectly into the vision he was slowly crafting. Within a year, they were married, and Marcus moved quickly to isolate Patricia from her family and friends. At first, his behavior seemed like protective affection. He didn't want her to work too hard or be around people who, he said, might lead her astray. But the demands escalated. He forbade her from seeing certain friends, encouraged her to wear conservative clothing, and insisted that she spend her days at home. She thought it was just a phase, something he'd eventually relax about. But the more she gave, the tighter his grip became. By the time their first child was born, Marcus's control had hardened into something close to tyranny. Every detail of their home life was governed by his rules: when they ate, what they wore, the books they read, even the time they went to sleep. Patricia's days blurred together, a series of chores and routines that she followed without question. She told herself that it was all for the sake of family unity, that Marcus only wanted what was best for them. Yet the discomfort festered, and she found herself watching his every move, noticing the slight changes in his expression when she asked the wrong question or looked away too long. Marcus's children grew up in a household steeped in tension, bound by rules and restrictions that went beyond mere discipline. His words became scripture, his punishments meted out as lessons they were meant to learn. One cold winter night, Marcus gathered the family into the dimly lit living room. He spoke of a vision he'd had, a calling that revealed their family's divine purpose. He told them they were chosen, bound together by something larger than themselves. With a fervor in his voice that chilled even Patricia, he proclaimed himself the patriarch, the ultimate authority. His eyes burned with a light that left no room for dissent, no hint of compromise. He was father, protector, ruler. The children, some still barely old enough to understand the meaning of his words, listened with rapt attention. Their father's intensity seeped into their hearts, planting seeds of fear and loyalty. Patricia watched in silence, feeling a shiver of dread, yet unable to break the spell he'd cast over them all. In the years that followed, Marcus's hold only grew stronger, his rules more rigid. Every choice, every action, every thought had to pass through his judgment, and though Patricia often thought about leaving, about escaping with the children, a paralyzing fear kept her rooted in place. For somewhere in the depths of her mind, Marcus's words echoed, the idea that there was no world outside the one he'd created for them. As the family's lives became a twisted blend of devotion and dread, Marcus's need for control evolved into something darker, something that pushed the boundaries of fatherhood, of family, of love itself. And as he forged ahead on his chosen path, he would leave a trail that no one could ignore, a trail of secrets, manipulation, and a tragic fate that awaited them all. Marcus Wesson's home stood apart from the world, an enclave bound by his rules and isolated from the flow of everyday life. To outsiders, it looked normal enough, a small house tucked away in a quiet neighborhood. Yet behind closed doors, Marcus's strict beliefs shaped every facet of life, instilling fear, obedience, and a loyalty that bordered on fanaticism. As the children grew older, he carefully laid the foundation for a belief system that only he understood, a system that placed him at its center. Marcus's words became something akin to scripture, his twisted interpretation of religious doctrine filling every conversation. He claimed to have direct revelations, to be a messenger of divine truth, and his family the chosen ones, who would walk alongside him into salvation. His eyes would take on an eerie, fervent glow when he spoke of destiny, family, and loyalty, leaving no room for questions or doubts. Over time, his authority in the household morphed into something far more powerful and unsettling. He began forbidding the family from engaging with the outside world. School was deemed unnecessary, friends were a distraction, and contact with anyone outside the family was viewed as a contamination of their sacred bond. Even Patricia, who had once been allowed brief visits to her own relatives, now found herself restricted to the house, her every move under his watchful eye. Her attempts to argue were met with cold stares or thinly veiled threats, leaving her feeling helpless, trapped within the prison he'd crafted. With each passing year, Marcus's obsession deepened. He began preaching to his children about concepts of purity and loyalty, hinting that one day they would all need to make sacrifices to fulfill the family's divine mission. The children, too young to understand the full meaning of his words, nodded along, fearful of what might happen if they did not please their father. He wove tales of a future free from the world's corruption, a future in which their family would stand as pillars of purity and righteousness, untouched by sin or doubt. But with his expanding ideas of purity came darker, more disturbing practices. He began separating the children based on his twisted interpretations of worthiness and devotion, favoring some while punishing others for the smallest perceived infractions. The favoritism fostered resentment and confusion among the siblings, yet none dared to openly question his decisions. He would single out one child, lavishing attention and praise upon them while others watched in silence, afraid of what might happen if they failed to meet his impossible standards. One particularly tense evening, Marcus called the family into the living room. Patricia, by now accustomed to his late-night family meetings, felt her heart sink as she watched him pace the floor with a look of grim determination. He spoke of visions he'd had, visions that showed their family rising above all others, bound together in a purity no one else could understand. He declared that, from this moment onward, they would live by an even stricter set of rules, abandoning all contact with anyone outside the family, severing ties with any remaining friends or relatives. The room was heavy with dread as he laid out his plans. The children, huddled together, exchanged worried glances. For them, the house had long been a place of fear, but now it was transforming into a fortress of isolation, a realm completely cut off from the world beyond its walls. In the days that followed, Marcus's rules grew more intense. He began monitoring their every action, filling each day with tasks, chores, and teachings that allowed no room for independent thought or outside influence. He even collected the family's meager possessions, locking away anything he deemed unholy or distracting. One night, as Patricia lay awake, she heard Marcus muttering to himself in the next room. The words were faint, almost inaudible, but she caught fragments, references to purity, to sin, to salvation. She felt a chill run through her as she realized how far his beliefs had spiraled out of control. The man she had once loved, the man who had promised her safety and protection, was no longer someone she recognized. He was a stranger, consumed by a darkness that seemed to grow with each passing day. And though she longed to leave, to save her children from the shadow that had overtaken their lives, the fear kept her rooted in place. For Marcus had made it clear that no one left the family, that anyone who defied his authority would be punished in ways that left her too afraid to imagine. As the walls of their home closed in, Marcus's grip on reality frayed, and the family's isolation grew deeper. They were, in every sense, prisoners of his creation, bound by beliefs that none of them could escape. And as Marcus continued to preach his twisted doctrines, an invisible clock ticked down, a countdown to a final tragic event that no one could stop. In the Wesson household, silence was as thick as the walls. The children's once vibrant personalities dulled under the oppressive rule that bound their lives, and Patricia's spirit wore thin from years of acquiescence and fear. They lived in a constant state of unease, their days dictated by Marcus's whims, every movement monitored, every word weighed for loyalty. As Marcus's beliefs spiraled further, the punishments for disobedience grew harsher. Then, in the early months of 1999, cracks began to form. Patricia noticed subtle shifts in some of the older children. They were no longer as eager to please Marcus, their obedience laced with quiet resentment. She saw it in the way they exchanged glances when Marcus wasn't looking, small sparks of resistance, though they dared not speak a word of defiance aloud. Yet Marcus noticed the changes too, and he grew suspicious, vigilant, even paranoid. One evening, his oldest daughter, Melissa, failed to answer him immediately when he called her name. Her hesitation was slight, but in Marcus's eyes, it was a transgression. He stood before her, his gaze cold and unyielding, as the rest of the family looked on in dread. Melissa's defiance, a single moment of delay, marked her in Marcus's mind as a threat to the family's purity. Without warning, he ordered everyone to the living room. Marcus's voice trembled with a fervor that bordered on madness, his words punctuated with accusations. He told the family that Melissa had become impure, that she risked tainting the family with her defiance, and he would not tolerate anything less than absolute loyalty. He made it clear that his word was law, that anyone who strayed would face the consequences. Yet, as Marcus's anger simmered, Patricia felt an unexpected surge of courage. She'd endured years of silence, years of watching her children suffer under his control. She knew that standing up to Marcus would mean consequences, that her own fear might cost her dearly. But as she looked into Melissa's terrified eyes, something broke inside her. For the first time, Patricia met Marcus's gaze with steady resolve. "What you're doing isn't love," she said softly, her voice quivering yet firm. "This isn't family." Marcus's expression shifted, his face a mask of shock and fury. For a long, tense moment, he simply stared at her, as though he couldn't fathom the defiance. The rest of the family held their breath, the room thick with an anticipation that bordered on terror. But instead of a violent outburst, Marcus turned away. His reaction was cold, calculating. He simply muttered that Patricia and Melissa had betrayed the family, that they had allowed outside influences to cloud their loyalty. He promised that they would repent, and that order would be restored. In the days that followed, Marcus's punishments grew harsher. He forbade Patricia and Melissa from speaking to the other children, ordering them to remain isolated. The rest of the family was instructed to shun them, treating them as outsiders in their own home. But beneath the cold control, Marcus's paranoia festered. He watched their every move, convinced they were conspiring against him, that their so-called betrayal would lead others astray. One night, as the family huddled in their rooms, Melissa dared to approach her younger siblings. She whispered words of comfort, small assurances that, one day, they could escape this nightmare. Her words carried a sense of hope, fragile yet defiant. And as Patricia listened from across the room, she knew that her daughter was right. They had to find a way out. But Marcus's reach was long, his grip on the family too tight. Any attempt at escape would risk his wrath, a wrath that none of them could bear to imagine. Still, the seed of rebellion had been planted, and with it, a determination that grew stronger each day. And as the shadows lengthened and Marcus's paranoia deepened, the Wesson household teetered on the brink, a fragile balance between control and chaos. They lived on borrowed time, knowing that one wrong move, one whispered word, could lead them into a tragedy from which none of them might emerge. As the weeks wore on, the Wesson household became a place of muted glances and whispered defiance. Patricia and Melissa's silent rebellion had sparked a quiet revolution in the hearts of the other children, who began to see beyond the walls Marcus had built around them. Patricia had become a symbol of hope, though her spirit was still battered by years of oppression. With each passing day, she gathered strength, watching for any opportunity to get her children to safety. One evening, Marcus announced a new rule. He declared that the family would now observe purification rituals meant to keep them all safe from outside influences. The so-called ritual was nothing more than Marcus's means of exerting control, and his unpredictable outbursts kept the entire family walking on eggshells. The children complied, fear etched into their young faces as Marcus's paranoia grew to terrifying new heights. But Patricia knew it was time to act. She could sense that Marcus's control was fraying, his paranoia making him reckless. She recognized his vulnerability as both an opportunity and a danger. If she played her cards right, she might find a way to gather her children and leave in secret, slipping away under the cover of night. And she knew she had to do it soon, before Marcus sensed her intentions. One night, Patricia gathered her children in the kitchen, while Marcus was absorbed in his self-imposed rituals in the basement. In hushed tones, she told them about her plan. Her voice was soft but resolute, and her eyes shone with a determination they hadn't seen in years. She explained that they would need to leave quietly, without so much as a whisper that might alert Marcus to their intentions. The children listened, wide-eyed and hopeful, yet fearful of what leaving might mean. They had only known their father's world, only ever lived under his rules and in his distorted sense of family. But the glimmer of a life beyond those walls ignited something in them, a courage that had lain dormant under layers of obedience and fear. Over the next few days, Patricia put the pieces of her plan into place, hiding small supplies in an old duffel bag she found in the back of a closet. She chose moments when Marcus was distracted, using every ounce of caution she'd built up over the years to avoid detection. She instructed the older children to pack a few essentials, quietly and with utmost care. But as they prepared for their escape, Marcus began to notice something amiss. His paranoia, already simmering, flared as he saw the subtle changes in their behavior. His watchfulness intensified, his eyes following them with an unsettling intensity. He questioned Patricia in his icy tone, his words laden with accusation. Patricia maintained her calm, insisting that nothing had changed, that they were as devoted as ever. She held her breath, praying he would not notice the strain in her voice, the tension in her movements. But Marcus sensed it, the stirring of something beyond his control. His suspicions hardened into a belief that his family was turning against him, that they were tainted by outside forces he could not control. And as his mind spiraled deeper into paranoia, he tightened his grip, monitoring their every move, barring the children from gathering together, insisting they remain in separate rooms. Patricia felt the walls closing in, her desperation mounting with each passing day. She realized that escape would require perfect timing, a moment when Marcus's guard was lowered enough to give them a slim window. But the more she waited, the higher the stakes became. She knew that if Marcus caught even the faintest whisper of their plan, the consequences would be devastating. One cold evening, as Marcus was preoccupied with his endless rituals in the basement, Patricia gathered her children in their small shared bedroom. She whispered her final instructions, her voice a blend of urgency and fierce love. She told them to be strong, to stay silent, to trust her, even if the road ahead was uncertain. With one last look at each of her children, she vowed to see them through, to give them a life beyond the walls of this prison. And though fear clawed at her heart, her determination burned stronger. For the first time, she saw a glimpse of freedom, a vision of a life without fear, where her children could grow up in peace. And as they lay in the dark, waiting for the moment to come, a shadow crossed the door. A figure stood in the doorway, and Patricia's heart stopped. Marcus had returned, his gaze colder than ever, his suspicions fully awakened. He watched them, his presence looming, a silent warning hanging in the air. The moment had passed, and with it, Patricia's fragile hope. She knew now that escape would not be easy, that Marcus's vigilance had sharpened. But deep down she refused to surrender. Somewhere within her, a spark of rebellion remained, undimmed by fear, waiting for the next chance to break free. The air in the Wesson household crackled with tension, as though a storm was brewing just beneath the surface. Patricia's heart raced as she lay awake, the soft breaths of her children, a comforting sound in the darkness. She had hoped for a moment of respite, a chance to gather her thoughts, but Marcus's return had shattered that illusion. His presence loomed in her mind, a dark cloud that threatened to engulf their fragile plans. In the following days, Marcus's behavior became increasingly erratic. He was no longer just paranoid, he was on edge, as if he were a coiled spring, ready to snap at any moment. He watched his children with hawk-like intensity, his gaze penetrating as though he could read their thoughts. Patricia felt suffocated, trapped in a game where the rules had shifted and the stakes had never been higher. Every move they made was scrutinized. When the children shared fleeting glances or whispered too quietly, Marcus would erupt, his voice filled with fury. His accusations were sharp, cutting through the air like knives, and Patricia could see the fear etched on her children's faces. They were living in a pressure cooker, and the imminent explosion felt unavoidable. Finally, after days of simmering tensions, the opportunity arose. It was late one night, and Marcus had retreated to the basement once again, muttering about his purification and the need to keep the family pure. Patricia sensed the moment had come. She gathered her children in their room, the urgency palpable. She whispered her plan. They would leave tonight. With the darkness of night enveloping the house, they moved with a shared sense of purpose. They slipped on their shoes, grabbed their bags, and waited for the right moment. Just as Patricia was about to open the door, a chilling voice echoed from the hallway. "Where do you think you're going?" Marcus stood there, illuminated by the dim light from the kitchen, his eyes burning with fury. The moment froze, time stretching into a painful eternity as the gravity of the situation crashed over them. Patricia's heart raced. She felt the color drain from her face, The children huddled closer, instinctively seeking safety in their mother's presence. "Dad, we were just—" Melissa began, her voice faltering under Marcus's icy glare. "Don't lie to me," he snapped, taking a step closer, his demeanor shifting from curious to threatening in an instant. "I've seen the way you look at each other. You think I don't notice? You think I can't see your treachery?" Patricia's breath quickened as she stepped forward, instinctively placing herself between Marcus and her children. "Marcus, please, this isn't what you think. We just want to talk." His laughter echoed through the hall, cold and devoid of warmth. "Talk? You think you can talk your way out of this? You're all infected. It's time to cleanse the impure." In that moment, the reality of their situation hit Patricia like a brick. Marcus had gone too far. He wasn't just a father protecting his family. He was a man consumed by his delusions, willing to destroy everything in the name of his twisted beliefs. "Let them go, Marcus. They are your children," she pleaded, desperation clawing at her throat. "You can't keep them like this. You're hurting them." "I'm saving them," he roared, his voice reverberating against the walls. "You don't understand what's at stake. They're mine to protect, and I will not allow them to be tainted by your weakness." With those words, he lunged forward, his rage boiling over. Patricia instinctively pushed the children back, shielding them as best she could. In that instant, the fear that had paralyzed her for years shattered, replaced by a fierce instinct to protect her family at all costs. As Marcus moved closer, she felt a surge of adrenaline. "You need to stop this," she shouted, her voice steady. "We are leaving. Tonight." For a moment their eyes locked in a fierce battle of wills, the intensity of their shared history pulsing between them. But Marcus's fury twisted into something darker, something that filled the room with a palpable threat. He raised his arm as if to strike, and in that fraction of a second, everything shifted. The children gasped, a chorus of fear erupting from their lips. But Patricia stood her ground, her heart pounding in her chest. "You will not hurt them!" she yelled, her voice a fierce declaration that echoed in the stillness of the night. In a split second, the atmosphere shifted. Marcus's aggression seemed to falter, confusion flickering across his features, as if he were wrestling with his own demons. It was a fleeting moment, but it was enough. Seizing the opportunity, Patricia shouted for her children to run. "Go, now!" she urged, her voice laced with urgency. Without hesitation, the children surged past her, their small bodies pushing through the doorway, their feet pounding against the floor as they raced down the hallway. "Get back here," Marcus roared, regaining his composure as he turned to follow them. But Patricia stood firm, blocking his path, her heart racing as she braced for the confrontation that loomed. "Stop, Marcus. You're losing everything," she pleaded, desperation coloring her words. "You can still turn back." But Marcus's face twisted with fury, his resolve hardening. "You think you can take them from me? I won't let you." As his voice thundered through the halls, Patricia felt the world around her dissolve into chaos. She had opened the floodgates, and the storm was upon them. In that moment she realized that this was not just a battle for escape, it was a fight for survival, for herself, for her children, and against the man who had become a monster cloaked in the guise of a father. The line had been crossed, and there was no turning back. Patricia braced herself as Marcus advanced, fury radiating from him like heat from a fire. She could see the madness in his eyes, a flicker of the man she once loved buried beneath layers of delusion and rage. Her heart pounded in her chest, every instinct screaming at her to run, to escape. But she couldn't abandon her children, not now. "Get out of my way, Patricia," Marcus shouted, his voice a low growl that echoed through the hallway. "You've betrayed me, and you will pay the price." With her back pressed against the wall, Patricia held her ground. "This isn't you, Marcus. You don't have to do this. You can stop," she pleaded, her voice trembling yet fierce. In that moment, the darkness that had taken hold of Marcus flickered. She saw a glimmer of doubt cross his face, but it was gone as quickly as it appeared. His resolve hardened once more, the anger boiling over. "You think I'm the one who needs to change? You're the one poisoning them with your lies." Patricia felt the anger swell within her, mixing with the fear that had gripped her for years. "I'm trying to save them. This is not love, Marcus. You're hurting them, and you're hurting yourself." But Marcus was beyond reason. He lunged forward, his massive frame towering over her. Patricia braced for impact, knowing that she had to protect her children, to stand firm against the force of a man who had become a stranger. As he reached for her, she sidestepped, her body fueled by desperation. She darted down the hallway, heart racing, knowing she had to catch up with her children. Behind her, Marcus let out a roar of rage, the sound echoing in the darkened house. "Stay together!" Patricia shouted over her shoulder, her voice strained with urgency. "Run to the back door." The children, still reeling from the confrontation, sprinted ahead, their small feet pounding against the floor. They moved as one, instinctively following their mother's commands, the bond of their shared fear pushing them forward. Patricia raced after them, her heart racing with adrenaline as she glanced back to see Marcus barreling down the hallway, a force of fury intent on reclaiming his control. Panic flooded her veins as she thought of her children's safety. They had to make it to the door before he caught up. As they neared the back of the house, Patricia caught a glimpse of the door, its familiar outline barely visible in the darkness. The children reached it first, their fingers fumbling at the latch. They were so close, but Marcus's footsteps grew louder, echoing like a thunderstorm approaching from behind. "Open it! Hurry!" Patricia shouted, fear lacing her voice. With trembling hands, the children finally yanked the door open. The cool night air rushed in, a welcome relief from the suffocating tension inside the house. They stumbled out into the yard, their hearts racing as they turned to see Patricia follow them into the open space. But as they reached the threshold, Marcus surged through the door, his face twisted with rage. "You're not leaving me," he bellowed, the words laced with desperation. Patricia felt a chill run down her spine. There was a ferocity in his eyes that she had never seen before, a madness that drove him to pursue them at any cost. The children cried out, fear coursing through them as they realized their father was not just angry, he was unhinged. "Run!" Patricia yelled, her voice cutting through the night air. "Get to the neighbor's house, go!" The children took off, sprinting across the yard, but Patricia couldn't move. She turned to face Marcus, her heart racing as he stepped closer, fury boiling beneath the surface. "Patricia, you're making a mistake," he yelled, his voice dripping with a mix of anger and desperation. "You don't know what you're doing. I'm the only one who can protect them." "Protect them from what?" Patricia shot back, her voice strong despite the fear gripping her. "You're the one they need protection from." In that moment something shifted in Marcus. For a brief second, the anger faltered, and she could see the turmoil beneath the surface, the conflict that raged within him. But just as quickly as it appeared, the darkness returned. "You're a liar," he hissed, stepping closer. "You've poisoned them against me, and now you think you can take them away?" "No, Marcus," Patricia cried, her voice filled with emotion. "I'm trying to save them. You're losing your grip, and you don't even see it." With a sudden, terrifying speed, Marcus lunged forward, grabbing Patricia by the arm. The force of his grip was like iron, and she gasped at the pain. He pulled her toward him, his face a mask of fury and anguish. "You will not take them from me," he shouted, his voice filled with an intensity that sent chills down her spine. As he closed the distance between them, Patricia felt a surge of fear wash over her. But in that moment of desperation, she realized something essential. She couldn't let him take her children. With every ounce of strength she had left, she yanked her arm free from his grip and shoved him away. The force of her action caught him off guard, and he stumbled back, surprise flashing across his features. "Run!" she screamed again, the urgency in her voice resonating through the air. "Now!" In that fleeting moment, the children didn't hesitate. They sprinted toward the darkness of the night, their small bodies propelled by instinct and sheer terror. Patricia watched them go, her heart breaking, knowing they were so close to freedom. But as she turned back to face Marcus, the realization hit her like a wave. He was not just a man losing control. He was a man willing to destroy everything in his path, and she had to stop him. "Marcus, please," she begged, her voice trembling. "We can fix this. We can get help. You don't have to do this." But the darkness in his eyes had returned, and with it, a chilling resolve. "You don't get to decide what's best for us," he snarled, stepping toward her with a terrifying calmness. "You've lost your chance." Patricia felt her heart race as she prepared for the worst. She understood, in that moment, that this confrontation would determine not only her fate, but the fate of her children. They were at a breaking point, and the outcome was uncertain. As he lunged forward once more, Patricia steeled herself for the fight of her life. She knew she had to protect her children at all costs, even if it meant confronting the monster he had become. The chill of the night air was nothing compared to the icy dread that gripped Patricia's heart as she faced Marcus. Her breath came in short gasps, each inhale a reminder of the stakes at hand. She could feel the pulse of fear thrumming in her veins, but beneath it lay a fierce resolve. She wouldn't let Marcus destroy their family. "Get away from me!" she shouted, trying to keep her voice steady even as she felt the tremor in her hands. She took a step back, trying to create distance, knowing all too well that each inch she gained was precarious at best. "Why are you doing this?" he demanded, rage spilling from his words. "Do you want them to be tainted? Do you want them to end up like you? I'm the only one who knows how to protect them." Patricia shook her head, disbelief washing over her. "Protect them from what, Marcus? From a life where they can be loved and free. You're the one who's trapped them in a nightmare." His eyes narrowed, and for a moment, she could see a flicker of the man he once was, buried beneath layers of fear and madness. "You don't understand. They don't know what's best for them." "No, you don't understand," she retorted, her voice filled with a passion that cut through the air like a knife. "You're the one who's lost control. You're scaring them, Marcus." As the words left her lips, something shifted in Marcus's expression, a mixture of anger and uncertainty swirling in his eyes. It was a fragile opening, but she had to seize it. "Let's talk, just you and me," Patricia said, trying to calm the storm brewing within him. "We can figure this out. You don't have to be this way." But Marcus shook his head violently, the internal struggle visible in the tension of his features. "You don't get to make the rules anymore. This is my house, and I decide what happens here." With those words, he lunged at her again. Patricia dodged just in time, her heart racing as she narrowly avoided his grasp. Adrenaline surged through her, fueling her determination. She knew she couldn't let him take control. Not now, not ever. "Marcus, stop!" she shouted, desperation lacing her voice. She had to reach him, to pull him back from the edge before it was too late. "Why? So you can poison them with your lies?" he spat, his voice thick with anger. "I've protected them from the world, and you want to expose them to it." His fury was palpable, a physical force that seemed to push against her. Patricia took a deep breath, searching for the right words. "I'm trying to protect them from you. This isn't love, Marcus. You're hurting them more than you realize." For a brief moment, she saw a flicker of hesitation in his eyes. He seemed to falter, his expression shifting from rage to confusion. But before she could seize the opportunity, the darkness returned, consuming him once more. "You don't understand. They'll be just like you, weak, vulnerable. I won't let that happen." And just like that, the moment passed. He surged forward again, and Patricia had no choice but to move. She darted to the side, her body instinctively reacting to the threat. The adrenaline coursed through her, fueling her determination to protect her children at any cost. "Why are you doing this?" she yelled again, her voice rising above the chaos. "You don't have to fight me. We can find help together." But he wasn't listening. He was lost in his own fury, a tempest that blinded him to the truth. As he barreled toward her, she felt the cold grip of fear tightening around her heart. Patricia had to think fast. She glanced around the yard, searching for anything that could help her defend herself. There, near the edge of the porch, she spotted a heavy flower pot. It was a small thing, but it could be enough to create a moment of distraction. With a swift movement, she grabbed the pot and turned to face Marcus, raising it as a makeshift weapon. "Stay back!" she shouted, her voice shaking with both fear and determination. For a brief moment, Marcus hesitated, confusion flickering across his face. "What are you doing?" he asked, his tone shifting slightly, a hint of uncertainty creeping in. "I'm protecting my children," she cried, her heart pounding in her chest. "If you come any closer, I'll use this." He laughed, a cold, cruel sound that echoed in the night air. "You think that will stop me? You're a fool if you think you can scare me." "Maybe not, but I will fight for my kids," Patricia shouted back, her voice unwavering. With that declaration, she felt a surge of courage. It wasn't just about her anymore. It was about the future she wanted for her children. A life free from fear, free from Marcus's twisted grasp. As he moved toward her again, Patricia raised the pot high above her head, ready to swing if necessary. "I will do whatever it takes to keep my children safe." In that moment, the tension between them reached a breaking point. Marcus paused, his expression darkening, and she could see the storm brewing within him. But just as he seemed to regain control, the sound of their children's voices echoed from the distance. "Mom! Dad!" The cries were filled with fear, urgency cutting through the darkness. The sound of their children's voices brought Marcus to a standstill, a flicker of uncertainty crossing his face. He looked toward the direction of the noise, and in that instant, Patricia seized the opportunity. "Run!" she shouted again, her voice echoing through the night. "Get help!" The children, who had been hiding in the shadows, took off toward the neighbor's house, their small figures disappearing into the darkness. Patricia watched them go, her heart swelling with both relief and fear. They were safe for now, but she had to hold Marcus off. "Why are you doing this, Marcus?" she asked again, her voice filled with desperation. "You can't let them see you like this. They'll be terrified of you." The internal conflict played out on his face, a battle between love and madness that seemed to twist his features. "They're mine. I won't let you take them." "But you're losing them," Patricia cried, stepping closer despite the danger. "You're pushing them away. This isn't love. This is madness." For a moment, silence hung heavy in the air, the tension crackling between them like electricity. Patricia could see the struggle in his eyes, the conflict of emotions that threatened to consume him. But she knew she had to act fast. "I will protect them from you if I have to," she shouted, raising the pot higher, determination coursing through her veins. "You need to stop this, Marcus. It's not too late." But the moment passed. The rage returned, blinding him to everything but his own fear and anger. "You think you can scare me? You think you can stop me?" With a primal roar, he lunged forward, and Patricia swung the flower pot with all her strength. It connected with a sickening thud against his shoulder, the impact jarring, but not enough to stop him. He staggered back, momentarily stunned, and in that fleeting moment, Patricia took off toward the darkness, her heart pounding as she ran. She had to reach the children, had to ensure their safety. As she raced through the yard, the sounds of Marcus's fury echoed behind her, a haunting reminder of the monster lurking in the shadows. She didn't dare look back. She focused solely on getting to her kids. Panic surged through her as she approached the neighbor's house, the lights glowing like beacons in the night. She could hear her children's voices mingling with the sound of footsteps behind her, and her heart raced even faster. But she was close now, just a few more steps, and they would be safe. "Help! Please, someone help us!" she screamed, her voice raw with fear as she pounded on the neighbor's door. The door swung open, and Patricia was met with the startled face of Mrs. Thompson, their kind neighbor. "Patricia, what's wrong?" she asked, concern flooding her expression. "Please, let us in. Marcus, he's gone mad." Patricia gasped, her words tumbling out in a rush. "He's trying to hurt us." "Come in. Hurry," Mrs. Thompson urged, stepping aside to let Patricia and her children through. Patricia barely had time to breathe as she ushered her kids inside, locking the door behind her. Relief flooded through her, but it was short-lived. She knew Marcus wouldn't stop. He wouldn't give up easily. As she turned to her children, their wide eyes filled with fear, she gathered them close. "It's okay, you're safe now. Just stay close to me," she whispered, trying to calm their racing hearts. But deep down, she knew the storm was far from over. Marcus was still out there, and as long as he was, their safety remained uncertain. They needed help, and they needed it fast. Inside Mrs. Thompson's warm, inviting home, Patricia felt an overwhelming sense of relief wash over her. The chaos of the outside world faded momentarily as she hugged her children close, trying to shield them from the storm that raged beyond the door. The soft glow of the living room lights illuminated their faces, revealing wide eyes filled with fear and uncertainty. "Mom, is Dad coming?" young Emily asked, her voice trembling as she clutched her brother's hand tightly. Patricia swallowed hard, searching for the right words. "No, honey. We're safe here," she replied, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "But we need to be quiet and stay close. Can you do that for me?" The children nodded, their small bodies pressed against her as they settled onto the couch. Patricia glanced at Mrs. Thompson, who stood nearby, concern etched across her face. "Do you want me to call the police?" Mrs. Thompson asked quietly, glancing toward the door as if expecting Marcus to burst through at any moment. "Yes," Patricia replied, her voice steady despite the tumultuous emotions surging within her. "Please, we need help." Mrs. Thompson hurried to the phone, her movements quick and precise. As Patricia watched her dial, she felt a wave of gratitude wash over her. The world outside seemed to grow darker, the shadows stretching longer, but in that moment, they were safe. Patricia turned back to her children, who looked up at her with a mix of trust and fear. "Listen, I need you both to promise me something," she said softly, her tone serious. "No matter what happens, you stay quiet and don't open the door for anyone, okay?" "Okay, Mom," Alex replied, his voice steady as he held Emily's hand tighter. "Good," Patricia said, her heart swelling with love for her children. "I'm going to protect you. I promise." As Mrs. Thompson spoke urgently into the phone, Patricia felt the weight of the world pressing down on her. She couldn't shake the feeling that Marcus wouldn't let this go. He was unpredictable and dangerous, and she had no idea how far he would go to reclaim control. A moment later, Mrs. Thompson hung up the phone, her expression grim. "The police are on their way," she said, her voice low. "They're going to take this seriously, Patricia. You did the right thing." Patricia nodded, her heart racing as she looked toward the door. "Thank you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. But even as she spoke, a deep sense of dread settled in the pit of her stomach. She could almost feel Marcus's presence looming, like a storm on the horizon, waiting for the right moment to strike. "Mom, I'm scared," Emily whispered, her voice barely audible. "I know, sweetheart," Patricia said, leaning down to wrap her arms around her daughter. "But we're going to be okay. We just need to stay strong together." As they huddled together, the minutes stretched into what felt like hours. The weight of the silence was suffocating, and Patricia's mind raced with thoughts of what might happen next. Would Marcus find them? Would he try to break down the door? The uncertainty gnawed at her, but she forced herself to focus on her children, to be the calm in their storm. "Do you want to play a game?" she asked, trying to lift their spirits. "How about a guessing game? I'll think of something, and you two can guess what it is." Alex's eyes brightened at the idea. "Okay, I want to go first." As they played the game, the laughter of her children began to fill the room, a sound she clung to like a lifeline. It was a small comfort, a reminder that they could find moments of joy, even in the darkest of times. But as the minutes dragged on, that comfort was quickly overshadowed by an all-consuming fear. Suddenly, a loud banging noise reverberated through the house, shaking Patricia to her core. The sound echoed from the front door, each thud a reminder that Marcus was out there, a looming threat, ready to pounce. "Mom!" Alex exclaimed, his face pale with fear. "Shh!" Patricia whispered urgently, her heart racing as she quickly placed a finger to her lips. "Stay quiet." The banging continued, relentless and heavy, each thud sending chills down Patricia's spine. It felt like a countdown, a ticking clock echoing in her ears, each strike a reminder that time was running out. "Let me in!" Marcus's voice roared from the other side of the door, laced with anger and desperation. "Patricia, I know you're in there. Open the door." Patricia's breath caught in her throat, her heart pounding wildly in her chest. "What do we do?" she whispered to Mrs. Thompson, who stood frozen, her expression filled with fear. "We wait for the police," she replied, her voice shaky but resolute. "We can't let him in." "Please, Patricia," Marcus shouted, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm sorry. Just let me talk to you. I can fix this." Patricia felt the tension in the air grow thicker, suffocating as the fear threatened to envelop her. She knew Marcus could be manipulative, twisting words to gain control, but the sincerity in his voice rattled her, and she found herself teetering on the edge of doubt. "No," she shouted back, her voice firm. "You need help, Marcus. This isn't you anymore." "Help?" he barked, his tone shifting to anger. "You think you can just throw me away? I'm their father. You can't take them from me." Patricia's heart ached at the pain and fury in his voice, but she couldn't let that sway her. "You're not being a father right now. You're scaring them." With each word, she felt the weight of her decision pressing down on her. She had to be strong for her children. They needed to see that she wouldn't back down, that she wouldn't let Marcus destroy them any longer. "Open the door, Patricia," he demanded, his voice rising in a frenzy. "I swear, I'll make it right. Just give me a chance." The police lights flashed outside, illuminating the house in a wash of red and blue. Relief washed over Patricia, but fear still clawed at her insides. Would they arrive in time? Would they be able to subdue Marcus before he broke down the door? Suddenly she heard the sound of sirens growing louder, the police arriving just outside. The relief was fleeting, replaced by the stark reality that the confrontation was about to escalate. "Stay close," Patricia whispered to her children, feeling the weight of the moment crash down upon them. As she turned to face the door, she knew that whatever happened next would change everything. The sound of pounding fists continued, each thud a harbinger of chaos, but she was ready. She had to be. The door burst open, and the police officers stormed in, their presence a sudden wave of authority. "Patricia, get the kids to the back," one officer barked, scanning the room for Marcus. "Quickly," Patricia urged, leading her children toward the back of the house, their small hands gripping her tightly. The officers moved with urgency, voices raised as they shouted for Marcus. "Marcus Wesson, you need to come out now. We have a situation." Patricia felt a moment of hope flicker within her as the officers fanned out, ready to confront Marcus. But in the back of her mind, a dark thought lingered. Would he resist? Would he fight back? As they reached the safety of the kitchen, Patricia held her children close, her heart racing. The air was thick with tension, and she could hear the sounds of chaos spilling from the front of the house. "Stay here and don't make a sound," she whispered fiercely, looking into their wide eyes. "No matter what happens." The children nodded, their expressions a mixture of fear and determination. Patricia took a deep breath, steeling herself for the chaos that awaited. "Marcus!" one of the officers shouted from the living room, urgency lacing his tone. "This is your last chance. Come out peacefully." Patricia's heart raced as she listened to the exchange. The air crackled with tension, and she could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on her. Just then, she heard the unmistakable sound of a struggle. A loud crash echoed through the house, sending shivers down her spine. "No," she breathed, her heart pounding as fear gripped her once more. "Mom!" Emily cried out, her small voice quaking with fear. "Shh," Patricia urged, pressing a finger to her lips. "We need to stay quiet." But deep down, she felt the world slipping away, the chaos outside threatening to engulf them. Marcus was spiraling deeper into madness, and she knew they were in a fight for their lives. In that moment of uncertainty, Patricia could only hope that the officers would subdue him before it was too late. She had to believe they would bring her family back to safety, away from the nightmare that had consumed their lives. The sounds of chaos echoed through the house, merging into a cacophony of urgency and dread. Patricia huddled with her children in the dim light of the kitchen, her heart pounding as she listened to the shouts of the police mingled with Marcus's angry outbursts. "Get down!" she hissed, pushing her children beneath the kitchen table, their small bodies trembling with fear. Outside, the chaos escalated. She could hear the officers yelling commands, the crash of furniture, and Marcus's wild protests punctuating the air like gunshots. "You'll never take them from me. I'll kill anyone who tries." His voice was a mix of desperation and rage, sending icy tendrils of fear spiraling through Patricia. "What's happening, Mom?" Alex whispered, his eyes wide and filled with confusion. "Just stay quiet, honey. Please, stay quiet," she urged, her voice barely above a whisper. The atmosphere in the kitchen felt charged, heavy with the weight of uncertainty. Patricia's mind raced, each thought colliding with the next, as she fought to maintain her composure. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed from the living room, making her flinch. "No!" she gasped, pressing her palms to her face, feeling the sweat bead on her forehead. Then, without warning, the sound of footsteps approached, quick and heavy. Patricia's heart dropped as the door to the kitchen burst open. An officer stood framed in the doorway, his uniform dark and imposing. "Ma'am, you need to come with me." "Wait, my kids," she began, panic rising in her chest. "We'll get them. Now move," he ordered, urgency palpable in his voice. Patricia's instincts screamed at her to resist, but she could see the determination in the officer's eyes. He was right. They needed to leave the kitchen. "Okay, okay," she breathed, her voice trembling as she grabbed Alex and Emily, pulling them close. "Follow me, and don't look back." They crawled from beneath the table and rushed toward the officer, who ushered them into the hallway. The sounds of the struggle intensified, reverberating through the walls, sending Patricia's heart racing. As they moved, another officer joined them, his face a mask of focus. "We need to evacuate the area. Marcus is armed and dangerous. Stay close." Patricia's heart sank. Armed? The thought sent chills down her spine. "What about Marcus?" she asked, her voice tight with fear. "We're trained for this. Trust us," the officer replied, casting a glance behind them. "Let's keep moving." The urgency in his voice propelled her forward. They raced through the house, her heart pounding in time with their hurried steps. Patricia glanced back toward the living room, her chest tightening with dread. She couldn't help but think of the man she once loved, the father of her children, and the monster he had become. As they reached the back door, the officer pushed it open, and Patricia was met with the cool night air, the darkness heavy with anticipation. Outside, the flashing lights of police cars painted the scene in stark contrasts of red and blue, illuminating the surrounding chaos. Officers moved swiftly, shouting commands, their voices rising above the din. "Get in the car," the officer urged, guiding Patricia and her children toward a police cruiser parked nearby. "We'll keep you safe." "Mom, I want to go home," Emily whimpered, her eyes brimming with tears. "I know, sweetheart," Patricia said, fighting back her own tears. "But we can't right now. We'll be safe soon, I promise." She glanced back at the house, anxiety gnawing at her insides. "We just need to get away." As they climbed into the car, the officer closed the door behind them, the sound echoing like a finality. Patricia looked through the window, watching as the police worked to contain the situation. She could see officers moving cautiously toward the front of the house, weapons drawn, ready for anything. "Where's Dad?" Alex asked, his voice trembling. Patricia felt her heart twist at the question, knowing the answer was one she couldn't share. He's going to get help," she replied, her voice strained. But deep down, she knew that the man they once knew was gone. In his place was someone unrecognizable, someone filled with darkness and rage. The realization sent a wave of despair crashing over her. Just then, the sound of gunshots rang out, sharp and echoing, shattering the fragile calm. Patricia's heart leaped into her throat, and she instinctively pulled her children closer. "Stay down! Stay quiet!" she urged, her voice urgent. Outside, chaos erupted. The officers shouted, their commands mixing with the sounds of panic. Get back! Someone yelled. but Patricia couldn't tear her gaze away from the scene unfolding before her. She could see Marcus now, a dark figure looming near the front of the house, waving something in his hand. The world felt surreal as she processed what was happening. This was her life, her family, unraveling before her eyes. Patricia's breath came in ragged gasps as she fought to maintain her composure. "Please, please let them stop him," she whispered, her hands shaking as she gripped the seat. Moments passed like hours, and she could feel time stretching out, the weight of uncertainty hanging heavy in the air. Then, just as suddenly as it began, the chaos subsided. The officers moved in, surrounding Marcus, their shouts commanding and authoritative. "Put the weapon down! You're surrounded!" one of the officers shouted, his voice steady and firm. Marcus's response was a mix of anger and desperation. "You'll never take my family! I'll die before I let you!" His voice echoed with a mixture of pain and fury, sending a chill down Patricia's spine. "Marcus, please!" a voice pleaded, though Patricia couldn't tell who it belonged to. "This isn't the way. Think about your kids." But the words seemed to fall on deaf ears, and Patricia's heart raced as the standoff intensified. She wanted to scream, to rush out and plead with him to stop, but she knew that would only put her children in danger. Suddenly, the tension shattered like glass. The sound of a single gunshot pierced the air, followed by the chaotic shouts of officers and the shrill wail of sirens. Patricia's heart sank as she realized what had happened, her breath hitching in her throat. "Mom, what's happening?" Emily cried, her small body trembling in fear. "I don't know, sweetie, I don't know," Patricia replied, her voice barely above a whisper, filled with despair. The scene outside blurred as tears filled her eyes. All she could think about was the devastation unfolding before her, the life they had built reduced to chaos. She had tried so hard to protect her children, but now it felt like everything was slipping away. As the police surrounded the house, Patricia felt a wave of sorrow wash over her. No matter how it ended, their lives would never be the same. She had to hold on to hope, but deep down, she felt the darkness closing in.